Just going to get right to it today. As you can read in the description box, this is just a read-along. My personal readings weekly on Liberation News and my personal thoughts and analysis. These are my thoughts on my own. I'm just doing this voluntarily, nonprofit. If you feel like supporting Liberation News, though, or liberationnews.org, feel free to click on the description box and support them. Right. Let's get into the reading for today. Let's see, 31st, that's April 1st. All right, so there's a Spanish version. El panafricanista de izquierdas, Bassirou Diomaye Faye, fue confirmado como nuevo presidente electo de Senegal. All right, so they got that one in English as well. All right, let's get going today. Left Pan-Africanist Bassirou Diomaye Faye confirmed as Senegal's new president-elect. What's next? I hope I don't butcher his name too many times today. Written by Jasper Saw, March 31st, 2024, 3 minutes. And the photo is of Diomaye Faye after Senegal's election. On March 29th, the Constitutional Court of Senegal confirmed Bassirou Diomaye Faye as the next president-elect of the West African country, assuaging fears of a constitutional crisis after the political outsider won the election in the previous week. But what do these developments mean for Senegal, West Africa, and the world? Anti-system and left Pan-Africanist. The 44-year-old Faye will be the youngest president of Senegal. His victory is considered an upset. Faye is a self-described, quote, left Pan-Africanist, end quote, and his pledge to pursue significant systemic reforms in the country has been well received, in particular by Senegalese youth. Faye won as an independent after his party, the African Patriots of Senegal for Work, Ethics and Fraternity, PASTEF, was unilaterally dissolved in July of 2023 in a crackdown on opposition protests by the incumbent government of President Macky Sall, as covered last year in Liberation News. The leader of the party, Ousmane Sonko, was arrested along with Faye and barred from running in the 2024 presidential election. Sonko and Faye, who had been arrested earlier in 2023, were released along with hundreds of other political prisoners on March 14th, just 10 days before the election. Their release was triggered by the Constitutional Court barring an attempt by incumbent President Macky Sall to postpone the elections over concerns about which candidates were legally eligible to run. The court overturned this move, affirming that Sall must leave office on April 2nd. Sonko ran for president on the PASTEF ticket in 2019, receiving just over 15% of the vote. This year, Faye stepped in as the party's candidate, and Sonko's legal eligibility remained in question. And decisively won with 54.3% of the vote in the first round over incumbent Prime Minister Amadou Ba's 35.8%. Tectonic shifts in West Africa. Comparatively, one key campaign promise made by Faye was that Senegal would look at pathways to abandoning the SFAC franc, the French-controlled currency that is a cornerstone of neocolonialism in West Africa. Quote, there is no sovereignty without monetary sovereignty, end quote. Faye stated at the press conference earlier this month. Other elements of Faye's program are very similar to Sonko's 2019 run and include combating corruption, reorganizing certain governmental positions, reducing the power that France still maintains in the country, and a reevaluation of the country's energy imports. These moves point towards an undeniable trend towards reasserting sovereignty, pursuing regional integration, and seriously tackling underdevelopment across West Africa. It is clear that the establishment in Senegal considers a progressive electoral victory to be more acceptable than sharpening and exacerbating a potential constitutional crisis, especially in the context of the popularly backed military government that have taken power in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, which have united to form the Alliance of Sahel states. There is a long history of relations between the people of these countries before, during, and after the colonial period, including the short-lived Mali Federation from 1959 to 1960, which included modern-day Senegal and Mali. How will the imperialists respond? French President Emmanuel Macron and US President Joe Biden both quickly issued statements congratulating Faye on his victory. Macron went a step further, speaking with Faye over the phone to offer, quote, warm congratulations, end quote, and express France's desire to, quote, intensify, end quote, the partnership, end quote, between the countries. On his part, Faye has stated that Senegal would remain a, quote, trustworthy partner, end quote, of foreign allies. This is on the heels of an announcement from Macron in late February that France would be pursuing a, quote, new balanced relationship, end quote, with Africa in the context of having its troops expelled from Mali, Burkina Faso, and the Central African Republic in recent years. The, quote, new era, end quote, described by Macron essentially amounts to some methods of joint administration at the remaining French military installations in West Africa, not a withdrawal. The United States is also scrambling to find a path forward for its neocolonial projects on the African continent in this tumultuous time. In mid-March of 2024, Niger, which hosts the largest U.S. drone base in Africa and is a key asset in the Pentagon's AFRICOM, announced its intention to expel all U.S. troops from the country. The United States also operates a naval air base in Dakar, Senegal, as the westernmost point of the African continent. The base at Dakar serves as an important logistics and refueling hub, and it is worth noting that initially, after taking power, the military government of Niger did not immediately target the U.S. bases, focusing first instead on the French presence in the country. The people of Senegal have yet to see what transformations begin to take place with Faye as the new Senegalese president. It is clear, however, that Senegal is among many West African nations which are moving towards a radical shift away from the French neo-colonial domination that has historically crushed their country. There is part of a broader trend of anti-imperialist and anti-colonial changes taking place in West Africa, where Senegal fits in this context, and what transpires for the people remains to be seen as a progressive changes take place. For the people remains to be seen as progressive changes take place. All right, so my quick thoughts on this. Congratulations. That's awesome. It's awesome that they're getting the boot off their neck from imperialists, Western imperialists like France and US. And instead of being exploited directly, now with the US and France and Western allies are going to try to do is exploit it through deals, the way it's done with South America, but not as blatantly anymore. I see this as a smart move for Senegal. As long as they do go to reforming it so that their resources are used more towards helping the people, uplifting the people, and not just making a few handful of leaders more rich. we'll have to see, based on his election, what policies he will be pushing for. Uh, a key red flag to me is if he's not pushing universal health care policies right away, then that means he is already way too much willing to work with the establishment and Western imperialist powers. Um, this is the minimal which people should be given to all their people in all nations around the world: universal health care and basic standard of living. Um, I would like to see personally, as green flags, that he will be helping raise people out of poverty by first introducing education reform, housing reform, standards of living reforms that will bring up all people, and not just those that are well off, generationally wise. Um, yeah, there's much to be seen now. It is a good move. I think that a lot of different parts of Africa are pushing out Western imperialists and trying to be independent, sovereign, and create their own rules. But like I said, based on what I have learned from imperialism, Marxism, socialism, communism, capitalism, if the new leaders aren't pushing for new forms of equity that uplift all people, then these are red flags that it's just going to be more of the same. But obviously, they're pushing out people, leaders from the Western imperialist core, because they're not getting great deals out of it anymore. They rather make deals with people like China, or people in China, or people in Russia that are actually going to give them somewhat better deals, worth the value of their resources and minerals, instead of the exploitative deals that they've been getting with, say, America or France. Um, so goodbye to Western colonizers, uh, and hopefully this will be a better move for a good turning point for African people to join the rest of the world in independence and advancement and lifting up their people. Like I said, for me, these are red flags if the leadership in Africa does not start to uh, uh, send more populist messages and push more populist policies to uplift their people. What exactly he ran on, I can't say, but I'm pretty sure it was likely populist messaging. And populist messaging is usually messaging that promises the people a better standard of living through usually what is socialist means. Uh, but we will wait and see. And I'm sure I'll be reading update articles on this soon. Again, as I mentioned, Liberation News here has hyperlinks. If you scroll over like the yellow parts here, this is a link to their last article regarding this, which is it was July 2023, I believe. All right. Let's go on to the next article for tonight. So it's just a quick plug under Feminism Must Be Anti-Imperialist link here. Let's see. So this is a link promoting their video, Our Feminism Must Be Anti-Imperialist, PSL Roundtable. These are actually really useful to listen to because it does speak of a healthy kind of feminism that is unlike liberal feminism that is actually toxic to feminism itself, that only talks about empowering just a handful of women to be big bosses of working class women or minority women. Uh, the leftist feminism, which is like proletariat feminism, socialist feminism, is actually more based on factual evidence that women do need to unite through all working class levels to actually fight the imperialist core or Western empire or colonialism, um, or other systemic issues that capitalism brings uh, that do affect women in very negative ways. So Let me just read the article here. So the article is called Video, Our Feminism Must Be Anti-Imperialist, PSL Roundtable, March 31st, 2024. What does it mean to celebrate Women's History Month at a time when the struggle against U.S. empire is front and center? How can our feminism reflect this reality for women both in the U.S. and abroad? Three young organizers with the Party for Socialism and Liberation discussed the attempt to rebrand feminism in a way that leaves out the most majority of women. Wait, let me read that again. Three young organizers with the Party of Socialism and Liberation discussed the attempt to rebrand feminism in a way that leaves out the vast majority of women and how we must fight for a working-class anti-imperialist feminism. I think that we can also call that like proletariat feminism. But let's see, anti-imperialist feminism. That makes sense. So this video, if I click on it.
Hey everybody, my name is Rachel. I'm an organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation. I'm here today in New York City with other organizers.
All right, so I'm not gonna watch this all the way through with you. Feel free to click on the link to watch the video later if you like. I recommend it, especially if you're curious about what feminism really means, what it stands for, what the movement really should look like. This will be a great video of teaching people what an actual feminist movement looks like, which is it has a huge contrast to liberal feminism, which is pretty much just capitalist feminism. It's pretty much just capitalism rebranded or rewrapped with a pink bow. So yes, I recommend you watch this. Next article. All right, here's an interesting one. Here's an interesting one. Let me make sure the video is still good here. There's no issues. Okay. Seems like everything's good. Let me see here. Test 1, 2. All right. Sound is still good. That's awesome. All right. U.S. workers forced to bail out Intel, a top 100 company. Written by Chris Garaffa, April 1st, 2024. Photo, a worker walks through an Intel plant in Chandler, Arizona. Credit Carol M. Highsmith, Archive, Library of Congress, Print and Photographs Division. The U.S. government is set to give leading microchip manufacturer Intel a $8.5 billion grant, in addition to up to $11 billion in loans and additional tax credits. President Biden announced the grant, part of the massive $280 billion CHIPS Act, on March 20th in Arizona. Intel hardly needs a bailout from the government. The company reported a gross profit of $27.71 billion for the year of 2023 on $54.23 billion in revenue. While financial analysts fret about Intel's shrinking profits and lack of quarter-to-quarter growth, as it posted its first net loss in over 30 years in 2022, the company's numbers far outpace its primary competitor in the field of consumer and server-level chips, AMD. Intel maintains a 78% market share of PC chips globally, with AMD accounting for 13%. Like many other companies, it's investing significantly in the types of chips that are best used to power AI algorithms. In January, it split out its enterprise AI software business, Articulate AI, with a large group of investment and venture capital firms. Articulate AI software will be optimized for Intel's AI hardware, which will then increase demand for the equipment, leading to more sales for Intel Core's business. CEO of Intel, Pat Gelsinger, was lauded for taking a 25% cut to his pay in 2023, as the company's stock fell 50% since he took the job in 2021, but that only impacted his base salary of 1.25 million, an insignificant fraction of Gelsinger's total compensation of nearly 175 million in 2021. In 2022, Gelsinger still made 11.6 million. The average per capita income for Maricopa County, Arizona, where Chandler is just $41,261. And while the semiconductor industry moved jobs overseas, companies like Intel, along with IBM, Qualcomm, Texas Instruments, and Broadcom, spent a staggering 249 billion, or 70% of their profit, on stock buybacks between 2011 and 2020, lining the pockets of their executives and shareholders. Intel is also a target of the international boycott, divestment, and sanction movement. On March 19th, the day before the Arizona announcement, the Palestinian BDS National Committee launched the hashtag Boycott Intel campaign, citing the company's plan for a $25 billion foundry in Israel. Between grants, loans with generous terms, and tax breaks, Intel's benefit from the CHIPS Act funding comes up to approximately $25 billion. Intel already has facilities in the Israeli settlement of Kiryat Gat. The BDS National Committee also noted, quote, in 2020, Intel was indirectly employing some 53,000 workers in Israel, and in 2022, Intel Israel declared record exports of 8.7 billion, constituting 1.75% of Israel's entire GDP and 5.5% of all Israeli tech exports. Where will the money go? Biden has framed the CHIPS announcement as a boon to the working class, but most of the job it would create would only be temporary. The federal funds will go to 2 plants, each in Chandler, Arizona, and New Albany, Ohio, and will upgrade an existing plant in Arizona. Intel and the Biden administration are touting a total of 30,000 jobs to be created, but according to the New York Times, only around 10,000 of those will be manufacturing jobs. The other 20,000 will be construction jobs for the new projects. Once the plants are open, the construction jobs will end. In 2022, Intel had announced a $20 billion fab, or chip manufacturing plant, to be built in New Albany, Ohio. Just a month before the scheduled July 2022 groundbreaking, as Congress debated and stalled on passing the CHIPS Act, Intel announced they were putting a New Albany project on hold, effectively holding the government and workers hostage unless the government bailed them out. Further, while Intel's press release tout their, quote, commitment to corporate responsibility, end quote, the company has a history of creating danger for workers and those who live near their plants. Throughout California's Silicon Valley, where the microprocessor industry in the United States got its start, the Environmental Protection Agency had identified a number of Superfund sites where contaminants from the fabrication process have seeped into the dirt and groundwater. An EPA report on Intel's Mountain View plant, which it used from 1968 to 1981, notes that reducing the levels of dangerous trichloroethene (TCE) chemicals will take, quote, many decades, end quote. TCE was used as a solvent, and the CDC notes the prolonged exposure can cause, among other issues, confusion, nausea, liver damage, and death. Business practices that disregard the environment and health of workers, along with a lack of real environmental protection and enforcement, mean that facilities like this across Silicon Valley were leaking TCEs and other chemicals, poisoning water and the people who live nearby. Part of new Cold War strategy, the massive investment in Intel and other chip manufacturers under the 2022 CHIPS Act is part of the great move by the United States to contain China. During a press call about the Intel grants, Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo told reports, quote, we rely on a very small number of factories in Asia for all of our most sophisticated chips. That's untenable and unacceptable. It's an economic security problem. It's a national security problem, and we're going to change that, end quote. In their own words, it is, quote, untenable and unacceptable, end quote, for China to lead the United States in any field. The imperialist order demands that China and other countries only develop to levels that are necessary for continued exploitation of labor, resources, and markets, rather than allowing development on their own terms. Even with this massive influx of capital to private companies like Intel, Raimondo also said that target is only to have 20% of global chip production in the United States by 2030. It is clear that Biden's subsidy is once again a huge giveaway of public funds to a massive top 100 corporations, while framed as an investment in American manufacturing and beneficial to U.S. workers. It is merely another front in the new Cold War against China. Workers should not be forced to subsidize giant multi-billion-dollar companies and the outrageous salaries that their CEOs and investors make, or be told they're competing with Chinese workers for jobs. Corporations like Intel should be seized and turned into public property, owned by the working class who created the wealth in the first place. So the biggest gripe with the whole uh, CHIPS Act is that companies like Intel are getting billions among billions of dollars um, as handouts for them to expand. This is ridiculous. Like, whatever happened to the free market rules, right? If they're a free market, shouldn't they be able to compete on their own and produce more jobs? But no, what the handouts are for is so that they can just keep giving more money to their investors, to their shareholders. Uh, the United States doesn't need to give any corporations any handouts. If a corporation cannot succeed on its own in the free market, then is it really useful? Uh, let's think about this. Why is China making the most chips? Uh, because their government is probably funding it, right? They have more influence in their government. Uh, how they might be doing it is a question to look into for China, but they're obviously not worried about the shareholders. They're worried about the advancement of the people of society as a whole. Uh, and not to say that we should be doing the way they are doing it, but in America, where there's over 500,000 homeless people and over 60,000 people die a year due to lack of health care, why aren't we subsidizing all universal health care? Why aren't we subsidizing housing more or fully funding schools instead of just giving away billions of dollars to corporations? It's ridiculous. Uh, we know they mismanaged the money. It's explained in the report here that they just did stock back buybacks for like a decade, right? Um, the reason we say capitalism is violence is because of reports like this, when you're actually able to understand what's happening with all this money, and then you look out into the streets or you drive through a poor neighborhood and you see how people live in such horrible poverty, uh, you understand that um, this is just not a working system. Uh, when you see nice commercials about Intel and like nice commercials about the brand new luxury cars that they're coming out here. But then you have people in very dangerous neighborhoods driving dilapidated buses, going to very harshly underfunded schools. You start to question it, right? A lot of people aren't going to bother. A lot of people are going to try to hide or look away from it and say that it's because of individualism. They need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, kind of nonsense. But we don't live as individuals. We don't all live on an island. We all live in a society and communities. Uh, and we are all in some way connected to the big systemic issues of capitalism. Um, yeah. So, in regards to this report here, yeah, I agree. Companies like Intel, if they want to be subsidized, if they want to get loans, then they should have. Then the government should have more say on what they should be doing uh, and how they spend that money. I'm sure that parts of the Chips Act has definitely a lot of rules as to how they should spend that money, but it's not a long term. Uh, it's not a long term solution to just give a corporation billions of dollars just so they can do more stock buybacks. Um, and AI, what's AI about? Seriously, it's to me, it's almost like a rich man's crusade to reach Mars that is not going to help poor people in any way whatsoever. Um, the same with AI. It's not going to make jobs really easier for anybody. It's just really going to take jobs away from certain people. Uh, so when we get to a point where we have AI machines doing jobs for people, are then we going to consider uh, universal basic incomes for people because they're out of jobs? Or are we just going to have them fight for what little jobs are left, which is what capitalism is going to try to do? They try to present capitalism as individualistic, rugged individualism, kind of like a system where you can thrive if you work hard enough, right? But it's not what it's like when the government's printing up tons, billions of dollars for these corporations. So, uh, yeah, if the government wants to print up billions of dollars or redistribute resources, it should be doing it directly towards the people, directly giving the people jobs and the funding adequate for them to not only funding. I mean, we always talk about funding our schools properly. Um, that also means putting in legislation to fix the price gouging, right? Like if a pencil costs 10 cents, but I'm selling it to a school for $1, that's just price gouging and it's unnecessary. It's really theft. It's just legalized theft, uh, right? So all these contracts that happen with schools and stuff like that, that's exactly what's happening. Pencils that you would buy for like a 10 cents, the schools have to buy them under contract for probably more. And that pencil is just a light example. There's just think of this through the whole process of every material that's bought for a school. And this is America, right? Every school all over the United States for all children should look like schools in Beverly Hills, fully funded and fully staffed. All right. So those are my thoughts on that. Let's see what else is going on here. Defund the NYPD, demilitarize our public spaces. All right. Defund the NYPD, demilitarize our public spaces. Sadat Kabir, April 3rd, 2024. Photo, NYPD makes arrest at a pro-Palestine demonstration in January. The New York City Police Department is one of the most militarized police departments in the entire country. In its size, funding, and equipment, for decades, members of NYPD have traveled to Israel to train with Israeli forces, often adopting their tactics of infiltration and surveillance. And despite claims from right-wing politicians and pundits, we have not defunded the police in any way. If anything, many police departments have seen an increase in their budgets since the summer of 2020. And while the NYPD's budget on paper has remained relatively unchanged, the department has historically blown way past its budget every year for 20 years. It is outrageous that billions of New York City taxpayer dollars every year are spent on the NYPD in order for them to terrorize protesters, the poor, and the homeless. NYPD crackdown on pro-Palestine protesters. Despite what Mayor Eric Adams may claim, An overly armed and overfunded NYPD hasn't made our streets safer. Often, it's instead translated into more violent interactions and arrests, especially at protests. This includes a controversial practice known as kettling or trapping of protesters for arrest. Last fall, the NYPD agreed to reform tactics used to police protests in a legal settlement with the New York City Civil Liberties Union. Originally, the New York Civil Liberties Union brought a lawsuit against the department due to its violent response to Black Lives Matter protesters in 2020. The settlement placed limits on the NYPD Strategic Response Group, a rapid response unit formed to ostensibly combat terrorism that the NYCLU has described as, quote, notoriously violent, end quote. Most notably, the NYPD promised to no longer deploy the SRG at protests. However, that promise was short-lived as NYCLU protest monitors soon spotted SRG officers responding to pro-Palestine protests with excessive force, including punching a protester in the face and brutally arresting demonstrators. New York City public advocate Jumaine D. Williams, the second top-ranking official after the mayor, has recently spoke against the, quote, highlighted misuse of and misconduct by the NYPD SRG, end quote. He condemned the unit for escalating nonviolent protests into violence and called for them to be removed from policing protests. The reoccurring violence at protests does not appear to be a symptom of, quote, violent protesters, end quote, as NYPD may claim. Rather, it is responding officers who are often the agitators. To simply call it a, quote, troubling pattern, end quote, when NYPD has a track record of treating people so violently as to induce epileptic seizures in 2020, in February, and again last month, is an understatement. Pro-Palestinian demonstrations have been the first large-scale test for the NYPD since BLM protests in 2020. Drones have been deployed to monitor protesters while officers have engaged in dramatic and violent confrontations with protesters and members of the press alike. Kettling is also back in use by the SRG against protesters, even after it was banned as part of the settlement with NYCLU. As Israel continues its genocide in Gaza, let me repeat that. As Israel continues its genocide in Gaza, it appears demonstrations and clashes with the NYPD will continue for the foreseeable future as the mass movement for Palestine grows and refuses to back down in the face of police repression. NYPD crackdown on the poor. When police aren't terrorizing protesters in the streets, they can be found raking in the overtime in the city's subways, arresting those for such trivial offenses as fare evasion and sleeping or loitering in subway cars. The funneling of billions of dollars into the NYPD has been accompanied by Mayor Adams' own, quote, crime wave, end quote, propaganda campaign, resulting in a broader crackdown on homelessness and poverty, especially in the subways. This campaign depicts the unhoused as dangers to society who must be removed from public life for the safety of all other New Yorkers. To this, Adams has flooded stations with police and is now extending shifts to combat the supposed rise in crime. However, according to statistics, subway crime is actually trending downward. Not only that, but statistics have shown that the homeless are much more likely to be victims of violent crimes than assailants. In fact, the number of homeless people murdered in New York City jumped by 300% between 2018 to 2021. At the same time, Adams in 2022 cut $615 million from the Department of Homeless Services, what amounted to 20% of its overall budget. Already, the NYPD can be seen all over on platforms and by subway entrances watching turnstiles for fare evaders. This has only cost taxpayers more while sacrificing other essential services like libraries. Governor Kathy Hochul seemed to at least partially acknowledge this, as she described her decision to deploy the National Guard in New York City subway as more of a psychological crutch and political statement to, quote, demonstrate that Democrats fight crime as well, end quote. That hasn't stopped the wave of backlash that Hochul has received over the decision from both civil rights groups and even current and former NYPD officials. The optics of heavily armed active duty soldiers in combat fatigue have been so bad that the governor has now banned the National Guard from carrying military grade, quote, long guns, end quote, at bag check stations. Guardsmen at other locations will still be armed though. Clearly, all this is political theater. The militarization of the subway system did nothing to stop a dramatic shooting that took place in March on an A train in downtown Brooklyn. In fact, subway passengers fleeing the shooting were essentially trapped in the station, forced to exit single file through one turnstile due to the exit gate being locked to prevent the, quote, crime, end quote, of fare evasion. The dark irony here also is that Hoyt Schemerhorn station, where the train pulled into just as shots were fired, has a built-in police precinct. Defund the NYPD. Fight for socialism. Our public spaces belong to us, not the police, and most certainly not the National Guard, who now have the authority to turn away rioters who refuse a bag check. Militarizing subways and our neighborhoods not only doesn't make us safer, it often makes us less safe, which people of color disproportionately affected and over-policed. With people of color disproportionately affected and over-policed. Instead of overfunding the police and bringing the literal military into our public spaces, we need a major reinvestment in public services, from public schools to more trained mental health professionals and social workers. Investing in and developing education and economic programs will not only benefit working class families today, it can lead to fewer offenses and run-ins with law enforcement down the line. And, above all else, we need also to address the root cause of poverty, capitalism. It is capitalism that treats housing as a profit-seeking commodity rather than a social necessity, leaving hundreds of thousands homeless across the United States. It is capitalism that criminalizes poverty and funnels Black and brown youth into the mass incarceration system, often for trivial offenses. And it is capitalism that relies on racist police terror to enforce its property relations. Let me read that. And it is capitalism that relies on racist police terror to enforce its property relations. Let's fight to defund the NYPD, along with building a mass movement to overturn the system of exploitation which produces poverty and homelessness in the first place. Yeah, these last two paragraphs summarize it nicely. What we should be doing with all that funding money that funds the NYPD in the millions and billions, and not just the NYPD, but police officers all across the nation that aren't even trained to de-escalate situations, but are trained in Israel to actually brutally assault people. We see this as an example of the way the IDF and Israel is treating Palestine. And this is the same mentality that's being driven into police officers when they are trained and brought back into the United States or trained here by IDF trainers. Yeah, we need to think of a better system than the United States police force system. The National Guards, of course, shouldn't be there, shouldn't be necessary. If you have a healthy society, you don't have these issues in the subways. If you house all people as a right, you wouldn't have people sleeping in the subways. But people like Mayor Adams, rather say that uh, the homeless people, the poor people, are the criminals while they're getting slaughtered for sleeping in the subway. Um, so, yes, let's fully fund schools equally, fully fund their education, fully fund healthcare, and give people a minimal standard of living that is decent, such as housing and food. And everybody should have universal healthcare. You want to start a business and sell your, I don't know, your latest new gadget, your latest new widget. Yeah, put that in the free market. That's not a necessary tool or toy, basketball, whatever. Uh, Football, sports should be funded too. Sports should be funded to keep for kids, definitely, to keep kids entertained and developed, so that they spend productive lives. The same with the arts, like music. Even some adults should have affordable sports leagues or exercising. There's so many things that are uh, we have advanced so far that should be made basic needs that should be provided to humans nowadays with so much technological advancement. But what is really deterring this happiness uh, holistically around the world is capitalism, it's greed, it's people on the top hoarding wealth. Um, and then we can get more into like this nonsense that I heard recently, people re-mentioning about the fixed pie fallacy, which is total nonsense that doesn't even apply to real world uh, economics or solutions. It's just some ridiculous theory. I would put it up there with flat earthers. Like, who cares about your fixed pie or millions of thousands of fixed pies or little pies that are created every day? If the people creating pies hoard the whole pie to begin with and only give crumbs out, um, total nonsense. Totally like non-world applicable rhetoric that the right or conservatives or libertarians use to try to justify ghoulish capitalism without actually providing serious answers. Uh, so yeah, coming from a humble point of view, I think we should try to help our neighbors, uh, and we should fight for each other to have a more socialist government and eventually a communist system, which actually provides democracy to all equally, because that's what it means. Okay, let's move on. That's a solid article, by the way. I like that one. Not much else for today as I can see. Let me see here. Read that. Trans people need real fight back. We read that last week. Nigeria declares American military presence illegal, kicks out U.S. troops. We read that too. All right, that's a wrap for today. Cool. Not much else to say. Just a friendly reminder. You can find the links to these articles in the description box. This is nonprofit. My thoughts on these articles are my own. I am in no way affiliated with Liberation News. I am just somebody trying to understand these articles, understand life better, uh, have some personal growth, and analyze it. And feel free to have people join me if they want to help me analyze this or have more thoughts. Feel free to drop comments or contact me directly and perhaps join me in one of these. Anyways, everybody have a great weekend. This was a good session for me personally. I really enjoyed these articles. Have an excellent day and have a great week. Goodbye.